here to hear from the Senate Majority Leader on updates in Washington, D.C. You know, we had some major announcements here in the city over the past few weeks. It feels like it's a sign of good things to come. Now, although the city is still working on some challenges, public safety, struggling commercial corridors, and an underfunded public transportation system, there are signs of a vibrant, strong, and inclusive New York City on the horizon. And this is a sign that our city is growing, and it's exciting. There was some great news last week, right? The mayor, along with the New York City Football Club and the Queens Development Group, a joint venture of related companies, I saw Charles here earlier, and Sterling Equities, announced the vision for Willets Point, Queens, a project that I actually worked on twice in my career, and it's finally happening, including 2,500 affordable units of housing, all affordable. New York City's first soccer stadium, 100% privately funded. Open space, a new school, retail, a project expected to create 16,000 jobs, as well as generate $6.1 billion in economic activity over 30 years. Right? It's good news. And while 2,500 new homes are a step in the right direction, New York needs to build 560,000 housing units by 2030 to keep up with the expected population and job growth. Also, just last Tuesday exactly, Abney joined Tech NYC and Google to release a study conducted by HRNA advisors that found that the tech sector has contributed a massive economic impact and job growth in the city over the last decade. Basically, the sector that has carried job growth here in the city during the economic downturn during COVID. Great news, right? Employing 360,000 people across the tech and non-tech sectors in 2021. That's 7% of the entire workforce here in the city, and generated 4,400,000 in multiplier jobs and $291 billion in economic output for the city. And we still have work to do. The report also showed that tech workers have increasingly moved outside of New York City. The tech industry growth has struggled in boroughs like Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island, and New York City's tech ecosystem has seen minimal increases in non-white and female representation. And it doesn't match the city's diversity in terms of race and gender. So we still have work to do. But also last week, Time Out magazine headlined pointed out that the fact that New York City's tourism has rebounded to 85% of pre-pandemic levels, estimating that 6.5 million people are expected to visit New York City between Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve. Great news, right? This is great for restaurants, hotels, Broadway, New York City's entertainment sectors and nightlife. And we also know that we still have tremendous challenges. These figures comprise about 47.5 million domestic travelers, but only 9 million international visitors. We need to get our international travelers, especially the higher spending travelers, back to the city. And why am I mentioning this today? While we are making progress towards a strong comeback here in the city, we're not there yet. We need help. When I think of the productive bipartisanship over the last few months in the Senate, it was Chuck Schumer's leadership that got us here. The passage of the CHIPS and Science Act, the Safer Communities Act, the PACT Act, to provide care and compensation for our veterans, not to mention the historic funding and assistance he delivered to New Yorkers in the American Rescue Plan and Infrastructure Investments Jobs Act. We need this kind of leadership to get our city, our state, quite frankly, our country, back on track. And we know Chuck can get us there. And that's why I am so glad to call him ours. He might be the Senate Majority Leader, but he is the senator from New York that we are so proud of. Now, I talk about needing Chuck's help. Now I'm going to ask you all for your help. Tomorrow is Chuck's birthday. And on 3, I'd love everyone in the room to say, "Happy birthday, Chuck." 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday, Chuck. And now I welcome ABNY's chairman, Stephen Rubenstein, to the stage, who will introduce our special guest for today. Stephen.
Good morning, everybody. Let me begin with a little personal background. I am the product of 2 very proud Brooklyn Dodgers fans. My mom is from Flatbush, and my dad is from Bensonhurst. That said, in the 70s, Rusty Staub aside, the Yankees ruled as far as I was concerned. And the Yankees were led by Mr. October, Reggie Jackson, because Reggie delivered every October when it was online in the postseason. Now, a little later, Derek Jeter got the nickname Mr. November after a spectacular Game 4 opposite field walk-off home run, not to mention the famous flip that you guys may remember in 2001 against the Diamondbacks. But after this month's midterms, New York has a new king of clutch. You can't deny it. Step aside, Derek Jeter. Chuck Schumer, you are the new Mr. November. It took roughly 15 minutes after the polls closed here in New York for him to be declared the winner of his own race for a 5th term, not to mention 18 years in the House of Representatives, and not to mention his 6 years in the New York State Assembly. But actually, his reelection itself wasn't the main event. It wasn't until a few days later, when after all the votes were cast, that Majority Leader Schumer's candidates secured wins in Arizona and Nevada. Setting aside the pending runoff in Georgia, each and every one of his candidates won their reelection. Remember how every political prognosticator said Chuck Schumer would lose his majority and lose it big time. Well, Mr. November here pounded the pundits, negated the naysayers, and confounded his critics once again. Now, I don't care what your political affiliation is, having Chuck Schumer continuing as the majority leader is good news for New York. It is very good news. Who else is going to hold Sunday press conferences hassling airlines for making the seats too small for our tuchuses? Now, I figured if Chuck could use the word schmo in a campaign ad to describe Ted Cruz, I could use the word tuchus on the stage at Cipriani. Whether it's landing the money for Gateway and public housing, protecting the city from rising seas and storms, or delivering New York for COVID relief, which we badly needed, including Save Our Stages, Chuck always is there fighting and winning for us. Speaking of passionate public service, I'd just like a moment to recognize the other officials who are here with us today. We have Congressman Jerry Nadler, the DAs from the Bronx and Staten Island, DA Darcel Clark and DA Michael E. McMahon. Our Fire Commissioner Kavanaugh. And our CUNY Chancellor Felix Matos Rodriguez. Thank you all for what you do. Now back to Chuck. The majority leader has called presiding over the evenly divided Senate the hardest job he ever had. But the truth is, he's really damn good at it. He's taken that 50-50 Senate and delivered one of the most prolific and productive terms in modern history. The American Rescue Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, confirming a new Supreme Court justice, the first African American woman to hold the seat, confirming more than 80 federal judges, a landmark health care bill for veterans, the first federal gun safety legislation in 3 decades, and the most expansive action against climate change in U.S. history. This is what happens when you put a real New Yorker in charge. Senator, let me first say thank you on behalf of our Abney community and behalf of all New York. We need your effectiveness. Second, congratulations on your reelection and continuing as Majority Leader in the U.S. Senate. They need your steadiness. And third, let me join in also saying happy birthday. Please know that the integrity, passion, and compassion with which you lead is something we all take great pride in. So ladies and gentlemen, I give you our Senator, Mr. November, Chuck Schumer.
Well, thank you, Stephen. That was really nice. I very much appreciate those nice words, and it all comes from my love of New York. I just love New York. Now, a couple of quick points. Stephen mentioned we did have an ad where we used the word schmoes and shonda and kvel. It said Ted Cruz and a few of his colleagues were schmoes. I wanted to use another word, but the staff wouldn't let me. But that ad did better in upstate New York than anywhere else, which speaks well of New Yorkers. They love the Yiddish ad in upstate New York. Second, it was mentioned it's my birthday. You know I love to tell stories. Abe Lincoln said the best political leaders tell stories. So this is my Thanksgiving story. I was born on Thanksgiving Day, 1950. My mom went into labor at about 5 a.m. and my dad, they lived in Brooklyn. My dad got her in a car, which was called a Hudson. They don't make those anymore, and drove her to the hospital where she was due to give birth. It's no longer there. It was called French Hospital. It was on, the location's important, it was on 29th Street and 7th Avenue, and drove her in there. It was run by an order of French nuns. Why French nuns had a hospital in the middle of Manhattan, I don't know. Maybe they like to come to Manhattan, like everybody else. But in any case, in those days, it was a lot different than today. There was no, spouse in the birthing room, all this touchy-feely stuff. Iris and I. Iris is here today, by the way, another great public servant. We did something called Lamaze. No one's heard of that, but they have some other stuff. But in any case, in those days, they sent the husbands down to a little room where they smoked cigars, paced the floor, and waited for news of the blessed event. But it's about 9 a.m., and my dad, who's a bit of a free spirit, realizes he's at 29th and 7th. He says, guess what? I'm only 4 blocks from Macy's. I'll go watch the parade. So he leaves the hospital, goes and watches the parade for 3 hours. Towards the end of the parade, he bumps into a friend of his, tells him why he's there, and he says, oh, let's go into this local pub to celebrate the blessed event. I was born at 11 a.m. My father showed up at 4 p.m., precipitating the first fight my parents had over me. But they were married, I'll talk about my dad at the end, but they were married 72 years, so it couldn't have done too much damage. Anyway, it's great to be here. I want to thank Steve Rubenstein. He's been my friend for such a long time. Does a great job, not just for this wonderful Abney organization. I was there when his father and Lou Rudin and Bob Tisch and others came to New York. I was an assemblyman in 1975 during the crisis, and I saw the founding of Abney, and it's gone from good to great to even better. I want to thank Melva Miller. She does an amazing job as the executive director of Abney. Thank you, Melva. And I look forward to continuing to work with Abney and all of you in this room to continue to make New York a better place to live and work. One parenthetical point here. Everyone talks, oh, no one wants to live in big cities. That's a lot of bull. New York in the census in 2010 had 8.1 million people. It now has 8.9 million people in the 2020 census. It's a little lower with COVID, but those people are coming back. No city gained as many people between 2010 and 2020 in all of America in an absolute basis, but the more amazing fact is on a per capita basis, of the 25 biggest cities, we were fourth in population gain. I think Austin and Nashville and maybe it was Salt Lake City were ahead of us. We were ahead of Chicago. We were ahead of San Francisco. We were ahead of Miami. We were ahead of Boston. People want to live in a diverse, vibrant, pulsing place like New York, and that's going to continue to happen. I have no doubt about the continued greatness of New York. I'm also proud and honored that the people of New York have elected me to another term to keep me doing what I love. And in fact, thanks to the voice of the voters, I am the first New Yorker ever elected to 5 terms to the United States Senate. So I thank you all for that. It's deeply humbling to me, as it is motivating, and I vow to work just as hard and make this term every bit as impactful as the 4 that came before it. As you all know, New York's in my bones. I like to say that before I Love New York became our state motto, it was my credo. And I love every corner of it, every part of it. I love nothing more than visiting every corner of the city and riding my bicycle through the city and seeing what's going on. I still ride my bicycle. I'm not a spandex guy. I'm not going at 40 miles an hour, knocking you over. I go nice and slow. I fly our little plane, our little propeller plane around the state, and I love visiting every corner of New York State. They once did a little experiment. They blindfolded me in the plane and then told me to look out the window, and I could tell just where we were, because I visited, as you know, I have visited every county every year. Again, this will be my 24th year visiting all 62 counties. I think I'll stop and tell a story about that. I like stories. So why did I visit every county every year? When I first ran for the Senate, Al D'Amato, playing on the upstate, downstate division, he was the incumbent senator, very powerful, head of the banking committee. He said, he used in his campaign slogan upstate, he told people, if Schumer's elected, you'll never see him west of the Hudson. And so I said, well, God willing, I'm elected. I'll visit every county my first year. I won, I did, I loved it, so I did it every year since. So it really worked. In my first term, it's the day after election, I got 71% of the vote. That was a record in those days. And I carried every county but one, Hamilton County. Now, for those of you who know your New York geography, Hamilton County is beautiful. It's in the middle of the Adirondacks, great mountains and lakes, great hiking and hunting and fishing, but it's our smallest county. It only has 5,000 people. So the day after the election, I'm sitting with my chief of staff, Martin Brennan, and I have 2 great chiefs, Martin Brennan in New York and Mike Lynch in Washington, who've been with me since I started as senator. And they put me in my place, as they should. Not as much as my wife does, but they're still pretty good at it. And so I was sort of bragging. I said, Martin, why do you think it is that Hamilton County was the only county we lost? He said, well, it's simple, Chuck. I said, well, what do you mean it's simple? He said, well, look, you visited it 6 times, true to your promise. I said, yes. He said, it has only 5,000 people. I said, yes. Well, it's obvious. It's the only county where you actually met every single voter. Anyway, I'm going to keep going and keep trying to win Hamilton County, which I've never won. Anyway, we've had a great 2 years, as Stephen and Melva mentioned. We've accomplished, it was one of the most productive legislative sessions in recent memory. And I'm going to take a moment to celebrate the laws we've passed and the positive impact we've had on New York and are going to continue to have. This stuff, the effect of all this help we've been able to get New York is going to continue for years to come, because a lot of it hasn't even been implemented yet. But we did a whole lot. We passed the American Rescue Plan and pulled New York and our nation from the brink of COVID, when thousands of Americans were still dying every day. You may remember the crisis. I got calls from just about every small business that I knew. We're going under. Obviously, the arts, where people gathered and congregated, going under. The MTA was going to just go bankrupt. 4 of our major hospitals called me. These are major employers, beautiful hospitals that, help people so much, give the best health care in America. And they said, we're going to have to file for bankruptcy. And so this was a Republican administration, but even as minority leader, sometimes the 60-vote rule when you're in the minority has some say, we were able to push things that they didn't want. The Republicans wanted no aid for mass transit. We wouldn't have had an MTA. No one was riding the subways. We got $15 billion for that. They wanted no aid for the arts, a lifeblood, not only of New York's economy, but of our country's economy. And we passed the Save Our Stages bill, which not only saved Broadway, but all of these smaller arts institutions that are the glue of neighborhoods and so important to the vitality of New York. And hundreds of thousands of people come to New York wanting to be part of the arts and get their starts in these small little stages. We were able to save them. And we passed the BBB, which saved, the PPP, which saved all of our small businesses. I was able to make sure our larger institutions, you know, a lot of these senators and congressmen, oh, you know, these big New York institutions, they're wealthy, but they would have gone under too. And so we wrote the law so our bigger arts institutions would get the same kind of help that other arts institutions were getting, other big institutions were getting. The list goes on and on and on. And we were able to do it. And as a result of not only this bill, but of all the bills that we put together, you know, Senator Moynihan was my mentor. And he would decry the fact that New York was a donor state. In other words, we sent more money to Washington than we ever got back. Under my leadership as majority leader, and even as minority leader, these are the first few years that actually New York gets more money back than we send down to Washington. And part of that is because obviously we needed help and the federal government spent, but a lot of it is by defending the programs like the arts, like the subways, that are particular for New York. And second, I have a hand in writing the formulas, and you can be sure all of these formulae, I guess is the right word, are better for New York when you have a majority leader from the city of New York. So that was one thing. Another major, one of the bills that's going to have a huge effect on New York for years to come. You know, I was able when Sandy occurred to get $60 billion for New York, and a lot of it was for resilience building. That was a big fight, you may remember. We're still seeing the effects of that. They're still building, they're still using some of that money now to build our infrastructure. I see Gary LaBarbera shaking his head. He knows better than anybody. Well, the bipartisan infrastructure law was the largest infrastructure law in decades. And it's just going to create millions and millions of jobs in the country and hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs here in New York. But even more important than the jobs, as important as they are, our infrastructure can be totally rebuilt and revitalized. We had a lot of cheap talk from the former president about infrastructure. He would never do anything. We, in a bipartisan way, this was a group of Democrats and Republicans, and I always encourage bipartisanship. My first goal to get something done is to do it in a bipartisan way. There's a hierarchy. And if you can do it in a bipartisan way, do it. It's always better and easier. When you can't, then try to do it with just Democrats, and only as a third resort to do these show votes. A lot of people say, just have a show vote to show where they are. My job is to get things done. And only if you can't get something done do you do one of these show votes. Anyway, this was a bipartisan bill. It's going to have $11.6 billion, $11.6 billion in federal highway aid and $1.9 billion for bridge and repair replacement for New York. There's $3.5 billion to support upgrades for building resiliency and weatherization, $2.6 billion to eliminate our unsafe lead pipes, $100 million to provide broadband coverage. You know, everyone wanted rural broadband coverage, and I said, great, we should do that. Upstate New York, some of the areas need it. But there are a lot of poor people in the inner city, even though they're living right by cable, they can't get it. I'll never forget a little story. I met a woman in central Brooklyn in the summer of a year ago. And she said, "How are you doing?" Fine. She was a healthcare worker. And she said, "How are you doing?" Well, I'm really proud. My son is starting first grade, and I just bought him a computer, so he'll be able to really get plugged in and help. And then I saw in September, October, I said, "So how's your son doing?" She said, "Well, I lost my job. I can't afford the $70 a month for Wi-Fi, and the computer's useless for him." Well, this money will help provide people. It's a necessity. It's like electricity. And just as Roosevelt said, every American home should have electricity. Every American home in the 21st century needs broadband. That's in this bill. We got over $10 billion to the MTA for public transit projects, where there's now money to finish the 2nd Avenue subway up into East Harlem. There's enough money for that. There's money for Penn Station access in the Bronx, just as we're finishing East Side access, which has been long overdue. We will also now have Penn Station access for the Bronx and Westchester, not just to Grand Central, and that's going to make much more efficient our entire transit system, as well as increase the value of real estate in New York. We got $30 billion for Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, and that money is all available for Gateway. Now, other things too, but Gateway has all the money it needs in this project. And we just had a significant milestone in Gateway late Friday afternoon, very important. The Gateway Development Corporation, which I helped set up. You know, I had a struggle to get the governors of New Jersey and New York to say they were going to pay for half of it if the feds paid for half of it. We finally got them together, and now there's a Gateway Development Corporation, and they voted to approve the project development agreement, which is how much New York will pay, how much New Jersey will pay, and how much the feds put in. I'll try to get the Fed share even higher, but New York and New Jersey have to step up to the plate, and they are, to the credit of both Governors Hochul and Murphy, who have been far more supportive than their predecessors on that issue. Gateway is by far the most complicated and important infrastructure project in the country, and the PDA is critical to establishing a framework between New York, New Jersey, and Amtrak for design, construction, financial obligations, how disputes will be handled. And the PDA allows Gateway to advance the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration's SIG engineering phase. We got a positive rating from SIG. I watched this like a hawk, and all of these difficult steps are all being overcome one by one by one. So we got the SIG rating earlier this year. That's the federal government's primary source. And so now it won't cost that much from the Fed side, but there's $32 billion for Gateway. And President Biden has said Gateway is his #1 public works project in the country. And so we're going to get that done, fine and plain and simple. The CHIPS and Science Bill was mentioned, the largest manufacturing investment. One of my goals and dreams is to make upstate New York, which, as we know, has suffered. And we're one state, and New York City has done well. Our suburbs have done well, but upstate has been languishing. And one of my goals is to make upstate New York one of the centers, not just of the country, but of the world, in manufacturing and research and design of semiconductor chips, which are vital to our whole economy. The tire in your car has about 20 chips, because you know when your little light goes on that says your tire is low, chips are doing that. Chips do everything. And so we passed the CHIPS and Science Act. It's the largest manufacturing policy investment in American history. And in the 1980s, there was a very strong laissez-faire view, no industrial policy. Just let companies on their own do what they want, and America will prosper and be the economic center of the world. But in the 21st century, countries like China, like Germany, so many others are investing tens of billions of dollars in advancing science and advancing this type of manufacturing. If we just sat on our hands, we'd become a second-rate power in 20 or 30 years, economic and then otherwise. So this bill was vital. It was another, like the BIF, a bipartisan bill. Todd Young of Indiana, a good Republican senator from Indiana, was my co-sponsor. And it's revolutionary. And as you saw, the biggest investment in America was just announced by Micron, $100 billion in Syracuse. When Carrier When Carrier left Syracuse, it was just a blow to that city. The air conditioner was invented there. And the head of United Technologies said to me, "No one wants to live in Syracuse." That got me so mad. So damn mad. This arrogance. But in any case, now Syracuse has a great, great future with that. But there's more. Global Foundries, which makes a different kind of chip called legacy chips, which cars need, is doubling its plant. I helped them come to Malta, which is in Saratoga County near Albany, years ago. And now they're going to double their plant. And Edwards Vacuum, they're going to be all kinds of suppliers. So Edwards Vacuum is a British company that makes, you need to vacuum these clean rooms so they're spotless to make these chips. And they just announced they're investing the biggest vacuum factory, new factory in the country in Genesee County between Rochester and Buffalo. So this is sprouting up everywhere. And one thing that people haven't paid attention to, we have a very good chance to make University of Albany, which has a consortium of great companies like IBM and Applied Materials, as well as universities, as well as the state government, the primary center for high-end semiconductor chip research to get the new cutting end of chips. That's going to be the decision will be made in the spring, but you can be sure the majority leader from New York is going to do everything he can to make sure Albany is chosen, and I think we have a damn good chance. And that'll help other things. There's so much to talk about here. The Inflation Reduction Act, maybe the most, that was the one, all these things we did that Stephen and others mentioned were bipartisan. And I'll get to that in a minute. But the one thing we couldn't do bipartisan was deal with two major issues, well, to more than two, three major issues and several other issues. We had the Republicans in the Senate were totally in the throes of big oil. We couldn't get a thing done on climate. On pharmaceuticals, they would not move in our direction to get the cost of pharmaceuticals lower, and they wouldn't expand health care. So that we had to do using reconciliation and do it in with just Democratic votes, and as you know, that was hard. But I do have a secret weapon. How do I get 50 Democrats when you need every vote, from Manchin to Sanders and everyone in between, to be on the same page? I have a secret weapon. It's my flip phone. Every senator, I know the phone, you tell me a senator, I'll tell you his phone, if it's a Democrat, his or her phone number. And every one of them calls me directly, seriously. Don't go through staff, don't do emails, talk to me. And it works. Anyway, we got the Inflation Reduction Act done after a lot of travail. And it's, as said, it is going to the reduction, this bill will cause a 40% reduction in the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere by 2030. That's even more ambitious than New York's CLCPA, which I was supportive of. It's incredible in terms of the change it will do for climate. But we did it in a positive way. We didn't use sticks, we used carrots. And so business was far more amenable to this. So there are credits for commercial building efficiency upgrade, important to New York, credits to incentivize the construction of new efficient single and multifamily housing, credits to install EVs, EV charging stations so we can move forward quickly on electric vehicles, and credits, of course, for our energy like solar and battery storage in homes, but also for wind and solar. And New York is likely to be the #1 state in offshore wind in the country quite soon. And that is all because of these credits. And then there are smaller things, but things I love this kind of stuff. We are going to make South Brooklyn, near Industry City, the place that assembles the solar panel, the wind turbines that will be used offshore. And it's going to employ 300-400 people from Sunset Park who never had any opportunity and didn't have the kind of skills. They're going to get trained in those skills and they'll have good jobs. And it will be a great thing. Similarly, we're going to do the same thing in the Arthur Kill Terminal on Staten Island, and we were able to get grants for each of these. Another very exciting thing, it's so much. the guy who won the Nobel Prize to create the lithium battery was a man, he was born in Britain, he's a man named Whittington. He's a professor at Binghamton University. We just got a $100 million grant, and we are working to establish Binghamton as the center for lithium battery manufacturing and research in the whole country. And that was, and on Long Island, the Brookhaven National Labs has now something called the EIC, the Electron Ion Collider. It's a $2.5 billion project. It's the most advanced atom smasher is what they used to call it. I don't know what, cyclotron, whatever, I don't know, light source. They have a lot of different names for it. But it's the most advanced machine of its kind in the world, and it's going to unlock secrets in terms of quantum mechanics and everything else. That'll be amazing. And #1 in the world, it's going to be on Long Island. Other things we've done quickly, judges. Trump put in such horrible judges. I'm serious. I mean, aside from they were conservative, they had no understanding of what a judge has to do or be. I mean, one of them they put in for New York just turns my stomach that guy's on the bench, because I knew him. Ugh. Anyway, we have undone that. We have undone that, or we're counterbalancing it. We have set a record. We have now 83 federal judges that we have confirmed. 2/3 are women, and 2/3 are people of color. We're having the bench look like America. And it's not just, no offense, it's not just partners in law firms or prosecutors. It's people who are legal aid attorneys and people who are consumer advocates and people who are immigration lawyers. So the bench is getting a far greater breadth. And of course, topping it all was Ketanji Brown Jackson being the first black woman and the first public defender to sit on the United States Supreme Court. So, we did a lot. Second part of this speech, which will be shorter, I assure you, Stephen, I know we have a 10 o'clock deadline here. What's my analysis of the election? Obviously, I was very glad to take this. Why did it happen? And that's what I'd like to share with you a little bit here. And it's good, it's really good. So no one thought we would keep the Senate. No one. You know, they looked at the problems in the country, they looked at Biden's numbers, and they looked at the historical pattern. But two things happened in the last 2 years that I would say are related. One, just what I reviewed. We had a record for decades, the most productive 2 years that the Congress and the Senate has had in many, many decades, certainly since the 60s and maybe even further back. And second, Democrats kept the Senate and nearly kept the House. The two are intrinsically related. And this gives me a lot of faith. Because people, well, let me tell you how it was a little, I'll give you a little timeline. So in April or May, all the pundits were saying Democrats can't take back the Senate. No way. But in June, the public began to see that the Republican Party of old was not the Republican Party of new. That it had been taken over by a MAGA group with Trump. And they saw it, of course, in the horrible Dobbs decision. There were two other awful decisions that were overshadowed by Dobbs. They probably should have been, but one really affecting safety in New York, concealed carry, that someone could buy a gun in South Carolina, no questions asked. In the old days, if they came to New York with that gun, they'd have to tell the police, no more. Hurting our police and hurting our safety. And then there was another one with these horrible coal plants that were spewing poison into our atmosphere. They said the federal government couldn't regulate them. And most of their decisions, including Dobbs, just broke with precedent. These are hard-right, political MAGA judges. And so the public saw the Supreme Court decisions. The public saw, because of the January 6th hearings, and Jerry and the folks did a great job over there, because of the January 6th hearings, they actually saw the violence. Before that, they had heard about it, but every night on TV were these hooligans breaking into the Capitol, beating people up, beating up police officers. And they saw that. And third, they saw these way out, hard right Republicans. And what amazed them is the Republican leadership, not just Trump, but even some of the others, they didn't condemn any of this stuff. At best, they just were neutral. And at worst, some of them encouraged it. And so a lot of people, particularly people in the middle, Republicans who were not for Trump, independents who leaned conservative, said, holy moly, this is not the Republican Party I'm used to. I'm a Reagan Republican. I'm a Bush Republican. But then they asked themselves, but the Democrats, are they off on their own ideological ventures that have nothing to do with me? And can they ever get anything done? And in the June, July, and August burst of legislation we did, we proved to them that A, we could get things done, and B, we're getting things done that mattered to them. We're not talking about things that are irrelevant and, divisive. We're trying to get people together. And that's how they moved in our direction. And I want to give the American people a lot of credit. Throughout the summer, many people, I have to admit I was worried about democracy itself. Because when a party says they don't believe the results of an election with no evidence, the big lie, when they either countenance threats of violence or even violence itself, it is the beginnings of autocracy, gnawing at the democracy. And what happened is that the American people said no. They said, we don't like this. And they really sent a shot across the bow to the Republican leadership and said, we don't like this. You're going to go along with these MAGA crazy people. We're not going to vote for you anymore. And that's what happened. That's what happened. Our base, and particularly young people who voted in higher levels, were enthusiastic because of climate and what the president did. I helped push him on student debt. But people in the middle said, I'm going to give the Democrats a chance. And that's what happened in the election. But the roots of democracy are deep. They've created what the founding fathers called this God's noble experiment. That's what they called it when they had finished writing the Constitution. It's been there a long time. And it takes a little while because democracy moves slowly, particularly a democracy constructed as ours. But the people saw it. So I have a great deal of, strength that the American people resisted a lot of this MAGA stuff and told the Republican leadership, if you continue on this path, forget it. And I've talked to Leader McConnell. And I've said to him, look, in the next session, we're going to have the majority, but obviously on a lot of things we need 60 votes, and certainly you got McCarthy in the House. Let's try to work on as much as we can and bipartisan. And I said to him, if you go in the MAGA direction, you know it's going to be a loser for your party. So let's work together. We got a lot done in the last 2 years in bipartisan. Let's do it for the good above all of our country, but it's probably good for your party as well. And that is my hope that that happens. I'm going to conclude by telling you one little final story about my dad, because my dad will have been gone a year, actually on the same day as my birthday, tomorrow. So my grandpa came to America at 6 years old, and he had come from a family that was poor. My great-grandfather was a famous rabbi in Eastern Europe and had 18 kids, because he believed in the Bible, be fruitful and multiply is the first commandment of God to man in the Bible. But the Jews in Eastern Europe were poor. All they did was study, because they couldn't be a farmer, they couldn't be a tradesman. Although when I told this story to my caucus, Byron Dorgan, a droll Norwegian, said, he had 18 kids? I said, yes. He said he wasn't just studying. But in any case, the three youngest came to America, my grandpa in the 1890s, to be raised by an uncle. But the uncle was a ne'er-do-well. So my grandpa slept in doorways, stole apples from the push carts, didn't go to school, so he had to teach himself to read and write as a young adult. But when he was 14, it was pouring rain. And he sees all these people going into this nice building on the Lower East Side. And he says, hey, they're not charging admission, so I'll go in, I'll get dry. What was the building? There's a Yiddish word, beshert, God's hand, fate. The building was the labor temple built by the labor unions to teach the poor Irish, Italian, Jewish, Polish, German immigrants about the union movement. It was their annual meeting. They had 3 speakers, among them, among the greatest orators of the day, Eugene V. Debs, Will and Ariel Durant. My grandpa stays there and listens for 6 hours. That's how long the lectures were in those days. And he's hit by a thunderbolt. He becomes a union guy. He ends up in Utica, New York, working in the paper mills. He was one of the founders of the Paper Workers Union, which started up there, not one of the top 5, but one of the top 50. So my dad was raised in Utica, New York. World War II occurs, my dad's a patriot, he enlists, they give him a test, and he scores at the top of the list. So they give him top secret clearance and they teach him radar. Radar in the early days was being perfected, but its secondary, to see airplanes, but its secondary mission was to see mountains, because the Allies were flying over the Himalaya mountains, and the mountains were enshrouded in clouds, and the Japanese Zero fighter planes would chase the planes into the mountains. So my dad helped perfect radar, flew missions, was shot at by Japanese Zeros all the time, never hit. And he saved a lot of lives because he helped perfect radar. By the way, the only injury he got a parasite in the airfield in Burma and lost his hair. When I became a congressman, he says to me, so now you're a congressman, can I get my Purple Heart? I said, it's not for parasites, Dad. But in any case, World War II ends. Grandpa has lost his job as a union organizer. He buys a little exterminating business in Brooklyn, actually from a German-American who thought the Nazis were going to bomb New York, and this guy moved to Montana. But my grandpa's not a businessman. He's an idealist. He goes into people's houses, he exterminates, he sees they're poor. You shouldn't have rats or roaches, pay me when you can. He told the 3 workers in the business how to form a union and ask him for more money. He said he'd pay them more. So my father gets back from the war, and the family's basically starving. He has to go into this junkie business. He spends the next 45 years in the business. First to support his brothers and his parents, then to support us. He hated it. But my dad never complained, and I never even heard him utter words of resentment about people who had given a better break than him. The only good news, at 68, he retired, and he and my mom had 30 great years together. But he's still here with me. For those of you who've been close to parents, I talk to him, I hear him. And he taught me values, and the 2 values he taught me that shaped my life and why I tell this story are these, because this is who I am. 1, always help people who need help. And 2, he said, if you're undertaking a major thing, look in your heart, make sure it's the right thing. Make sure you think it's the right thing. But if you are sure, persist and persist and persist, and God will reward you, and you will succeed. That's what we've done. And we've persisted, we've persisted, we've persisted. We had a good 2 years, and Dad will make sure that I will continue to persist and help New York for as long as I'm in the Senate. Thank you very much, everybody.
Since we're close to 10, we have time for about 2 questions. I'm going to start Vinny Alvarez.
Thank you. Just
And
wanted
by the
to...
way, folks, if you know anyone in Georgia,
Yep.
call them, tell them to make sure they vote. 51's better than 50 for New York.
That's right.
So make sure they vote and tell their friends to vote. I'm sorry.
And our folks are on it. You went through a lot of the different bills, which you passed in a really very productive session of Congress. It's going to put a lot of, with strong labor standards, which I know America's workers are going to be benefiting for, not only here in the city and state, but across the country. There's a unique opportunity in infrastructure. You mentioned climate, broadband, all of the different jobs that we can be created here in the city and throughout the state. What is the best way that we could take advantage of the grants that are available, the money, in some cases extraordinary grants that are available to municipalities like the city, and really throughout the state, so that we can replicate in different ways what Micron and other people, other companies are doing throughout the city and throughout the country.
So most of these, most of the legislation we passed, in the next few months, the administration will be coming out with guidelines. Most of them, many of them, we've arranged for the individual entities themselves to apply for the money, not give a big chunk to New York State or a big chunk to New York City and then let them give it out. Some of that does work that way, but a lot of it doesn't. And so there will be lots of different, in the next few months, and my office will inform your organization, Central Labor Council, and everybody of these rules, regulations, how to apply, and you can be sure we'll get an early step on a lot of these other places. I will continue to push for New York, and I think we'll do very well in that process. But it's a little early yet. Even the infrastructure bill, which was done a year ago, they gave out about $186 million in sort of easy stuff, but there's still another $900 billion to give out. And we'll look at all of that kind of stuff. Some of it, I just do, the gateway thing, for instance, I'm just going to make sure that happens, but then obviously it'll employ tens of thousands of workers here in New York.
Well, if I can ask the last question, can you talk to us about the potential for immigration reform in the next session?
Oh, God, this is a passion of mine. My middle name is actually Ellis Island, and Iris and I named our middle name for our younger daughter, Allison, is Emma, for Emma Lazarus, the poet who wrote the beautiful words on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, give me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And America desperately needs immigration reform. We need it because we have labor shortages all over the country. We need new workers. Every business, whether it be a high-end tech business or a guy who owns 3 McDonald's and can't find hamburger flippers, need it. And so my hope here, and this is a great question, this being a group with lots of business folks in it, and I spoke to the Business Roundtable, the BRT, which is the 200 biggest businesses in the country. And I said to them, look, there's a group of Republicans who always have worked with us on immigration reform. And the Republican Party was always, Ronald Reagan was pro-immigration reform, George W. Bush was pro-immigration reform, George H.W. Bush. I worked on bills with them. So we need the business community to go to a group of Republicans. We don't need all of them, and we're not going to get the hard-right MAGA people who have made anti-immigration in a vicious, nasty way their sort of credo. But we can get a good number of Republicans to work with us on a bill, a comprehensive bill, along the lines of the bill that the Gang of Eight did. John McCain and I headed it, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. It passed the Senate with 69 votes. Paul Ryan wanted to try to pass it in the House. He was then head of Ways and Means, and again, fate. Boehner stepped down. The Tea Party went to Ryan, who was going to be the next speaker, came the next speaker, and said, our 60 votes won't go for you if you do anything on immigration. But the need has become so much greater. And everyone is crying out for the shortage of workers, that there are a whole lot of reasons, that I think the business community could have a real effect. I would love to get something done on immigration reform. We'll have to do it in a bipartisan way. We'll have to deal with the issue of the border. We'll have to create a pathway, I believe in this strongly, of the 11 million undocumented who are here. But I think it's possible to get it done, and I hope we can get it done.
Senator, thank you. We're grateful and look forward to what's next.
Thank you, everybody. A happy Thanksgiving to everybody.